Sit Rep Day, April 26th, 2025. Man, there was a lot to report on today. This is going to be a lot more like one of the old sit reps in case you're just tuning in. And this is new. This format is new to you. I used to do sit reps that were almost entirely news on the war. And that's where we are now. And the negotiations, I used to start with an update on negotiations, and there are talks ongoing in Cairo. They have not stopped in Doha or in Cairo. One of the Hamas leaders, Mahmoud Mardawi, says that the mediators and the American administration now understand our position, which is a comprehensive deal without fragmentation. We offer sufficient flexibility to reach a comprehensive exchange deal that ends the war, ensures the complete withdrawal of the occupation, provides relief to the people, and enables reconstruction. This time, we will insist on guarantees regarding the end of the war. The occupation can resume fighting after any partial deal, but cannot do so under a comprehensive deal backed by international guarantees. We will demand that these guarantees be included in any agreement. Negotiations are ongoing regarding the details of the comprehensive deal. We will not accept handing over a soldier from here and a body from there in exchange for just a few days of calm. So that's an explicit statement that they're not going to play what the Israelis want them to play, which is to trade for food, to trade for a ceasing fire, and allow the Israelis to extract their long-term objectives from things they can't achieve on the battlefield through starvation and attacks on civilians. And Hamas is saying that's not going to happen. Another Hamas leader, Ali Baraka, says to Al Mayadeen, "We want a complete agreement, not a phased agreement, and we have no objection to a 5 year. I've also heard a 7 year truce. We will not repeat what happened in the January agreement, which Netanyahu overturned." Another one that the Hamas delegation talking to another media source, one of the Hamas leaders said, anyone who advises the military wings in Gaza said don't return to tried and failed partial deals that don't guarantee an end to the war, withdrawal, opening of crossings, aid entry, or prisoner exchange. One of the Hamas leaders said, anyone who advises against partial deals and refuses disarmament is without doubt prepared for the longest possible confrontation and steadfastness. They are willing to discuss a truce of 4 years or longer, as long as the weapons issue is not raised before a political track toward ending the occupation exists. And the four conditions: end to the war, withdrawal, opening of crossings, aid entry, prisoner exchange. Opening of crossings and aid entry being one. So all of that is, let me just, one connection that I want to make here is that when the ceasefire happened, it's hard for me to place anymore, I guess in January. The reason was not because of Trump coming to office or because of Witkoff going there. The reason was because the Israeli army cannot beat the Palestinian resistance. And the reason the war resumed was because enough time had passed that the Israelis forgot that their army can't beat the Palestinian resistance and began again to believe that they could win just by starvation and aerial bombardment. Now the ground war has resumed about a week ago, or a little bit more, and the Israeli army has commenced losing to the Palestinian resistance again. And I'll outline some of these operations in a little more detail. And of course, I highly recommend the Electronic Intifada live stream and the Resistance Report, which is on Thursdays. Last Thursday, you could see a lot of detail. And this Thursday, I'm sure you'll see more detail in what I'm about to tell you tonight. Um, so because the war is back on, because the Israelis are losing again, the negotiations talk also resumes. And you may have seen Trump say something like, "We want to help the Palestinian people. Their people of Gaza are suffering, and we're going to work really hard to help them." That's a little bit weird, but these things are not random. He doesn't want to help the Palestinian people. He wants to help the Israelis, and offering some kind of part of this theater now is always going to be that the Americans made us stop and we could have gone on. And so that's always going to be part of the story now. Whenever it is that they end up stopping because they were losing, because the cost of their war became too high against the resistance, they will say, "We didn't want to stop, but the Americans made us." And so they'll continue to float that notion. They'll continue to try to make that, they're going to try to prepare you for that story with little statements from Trump and people like that along the way. Okay, so West Bank, I should report, Tulkarm and Jenin are continuously under siege. There are battles. There was a shooting operation at a settlement near Jenin. One of the Palestinian resistance fighters, I believe, was killed after. Um, Jenin, Saraya al-Quds targeted Israeli forces with explosive devices. That was earlier in the week, on Monday. Um, Probably worth saying a few words about the Palestinian Liberation Organization Central Council, from which almost all of the important factions have withdrew. The PFLP withdrew, the DFLP withdrew, the PNI boycotted. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, whose mandate expired 16 years ago, has also canceled stipends for families of prisoners and martyrs, sending 300 men to train in Egypt in police tactics, accepted a few hundred billion or 100 million, sorry, and or maybe 1.8 billion in aid from the Europeans. Abbas made some appalling speech where he called the people in Gaza some names and told them to let the hostages go on the premise that this would the letting the hostages go would be the end of the war, which is the kind of childish thinking and naivety about Israel, which only see from the pro-Israel lobbyists on Twitter, but he's showing that level of thinking, but he's much more damaging than your average Twitter troll. So the big outcome of that meeting was to create a vice chairman of the executive committee. The vote was 170 in favor and one abstention and one against. And he appointed Hussein al-Sheikh to this position. So he's appointed his successor. Whatever is left of the Palestinian Authority will be administered by Hussein al-Sheikh after Abbas has moved on from this mortal coil. So Gaza, a lot of military reports to tell you about Gaza. The sword ambush. John talked about it. I mentioned it last sit rep because it had just happened. There was a jeep and an anti-personnel device. The video of that operation was released, and there was another ambush up in the same kind of part of Gaza, up in the north, called near Beit Hanoun. There's a report from Tufa that the Palestinian resistance said that's near Gaza City, of luring an Israeli engineering unit to the entrance of a tunnel rigged with explosives and detonating the tunnel mouth. There's fighting in Rafah, Tel El Sultan, which is where Yahya Sinwar was killed fighting. And there was a major ambush in Rafah. There was some other Qassam videos that they released as part of their media operation. One of their time is running out videos of one of the Israeli hostages And another remarkable video of them rescuing an Israeli hostage or more, one or more Israeli hostages from a tunnel where the Israelis had bombed it. And is the Israelis are bombing everything, but I do think there is evidence enough to conclude or to believe that if the Israelis have any intelligence on where the Israeli hostages are, they use that intelligence to try to kill them. They are finding it as a state much easier to plan if they could just kill all the hostages and then not worry about that. And they are behaving as if they want that, and they are behaving as if they don't want the Palestinians to have that leverage. So, as I've said many times, for the Israeli psychology, for the Israeli mentality, holding Palestinian prisoners is more important than having Israelis free and at large. It's more important for them to imprison Palestinian children and women and men than for them to have all of their Israelis at liberty. That is how their system works, and that is how their mentality is. It is an obsession. Remember, the colonizer is obsessed with the people they're colonizing. They're obsessed with the people they're oppressing. It's not a it's not what they would have you believe, that they are above it and they don't want anything to do with them and they just want them to go away. No, that's not the psychology at all. If you think that, you have missed a lot about what they're actually doing and what they're actually about. So other propaganda or media operations from the resistance. Abu Obeida, the spokesman of the military wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades, had a couple of statements, this one being a short and punchy one, and an even shorter, punchier one from yesterday. But this one was earlier in the week. Our fighters continue to fight heroic battles, carry out well planned ambushes, and lie in wait for enemy forces to inflict a certain slaughter on them at the place, time, and method of our choosing. Sorry, this was actually yesterday. The heroism of our fighters on the ground from Beit Hanoun to Rafah is a source of pride, a military miracle, and a testament to all the nation's youth and forces. Our fighters in combat zones and defensive ambushes are ready for confrontation and have pledged to remain steadfast until victory or martyrdom. Another operation in Shuja'iyya, where the Qassam brigades ambushed Israeli soldiers in a house, killing and wounding several. So, Tufa, I mentioned Yasin 105 attacks on vehicles as they enter Gaza City, the explosive device on April 21st in Beit Hanoun. That's in the buffer zone. It's not too far from the separation line. And I'll also give you another statement from Islamic Jihad on the question of surrendering weapons, because this was one of the things the Israelis and the Americans were trying to get out of the Palestinian resistance. They were trying to say, we'll give you a break in the war, we'll give you some food or some scraps or something if the Palestinian resistance disarms. So the Islamic Jihad movement said, we say that we will not surrender a single bullet except as a fiery bullet directed at those who try to take our weapons away. We will not give anyone the opportunity to even discuss with us the issue of the weapon. This is the weapon of the martyrs, the legacy of the martyrs. The weapon is a trust from all those now living under the rubble or living in tents, and this weapon is a trust of the entire Palestinian people. So they're not going to be giving up their weapons. They will not be manipulated or cajoled or strong armed or terrorized into giving up their weapons. So, speaking of, along the same lines, I guess I can now move to reporting on Yemen. Ansarullah in Yemen, they have had a very active week since I saw you last. The Americans have done 260 airstrikes on Yemen this week. The Yemenis have pointed out that the galaxy leader, so the Yemenis entered the war a year and a half ago by seizing an Israeli ship called the Galaxy Leader, a commercial ship, a big ship. And they seized it and they brought it to their port and they treated the crew very well and eventually let the crew go to its own go back to all their own countries during the ceasefire. They let them do that. But the ship is still there because they said, the ship is for the Palestinian resistance to decide what to do with the ship or what to trade the ship for or whatever. So the Americans are bombing that ship. They've bombed that ship 3 times now in port. So I don't know whether it's the fact that they have the intelligence to know what the ship is and they're bombing everything they recognize, or maybe it's like killing the hostages. They just can't stand the idea that the Palestinians might have some leverage in any kind of future negotiation. So the Yemenis made a point of mentioning that this is the third time the Americans have bombed the Galaxy Leader ship in its port. The president of Yemen stated at a defense council meeting, he had some doozy quotes as well. He said, "Every time that you hear that the American enemy with this crazy administration has mobilized more, be more reassured. If the Americans mobilize more, it means that their weapons have failed. The foolish criminal Trump burned all of America's cards, the aircraft carrier, the strategic bomber, and the electromagnetic system. Neither you nor your father Trump can prevent us from fulfilling our humanitarian, moral, and religious stance toward the people of Gaza, no matter what. A Yemeni woman stood firm against 5 bombs from your strategic bomber while Trump panicked when a bullet was fired at him and he was hit in the ear. Ouch. They said, this president also said that on the military level, they were not harmed even 1%. As for the B 2 bomber, God willing, news of it will come soon by the permission of God the Exalted. So I was worried about these B 2 bombers that are now bombing Yemen from higher up and out of the range of Yemen's defense, air defense. And their big payloads and their terrible bombs, which they're bombing civilian areas with. And the Yemeni Ansarullah are clearly very aware of what they have and and they're saying interesting things about the B2. News of it will soon come by permission of God. So maybe they have surprises. They have promised things before that they have then delivered. There was a time when they made a threat of the Palestine 2 ballistic missile, and now those missiles hit Israel every week. The Yafa drone and the Palestine 2 ballistic missile are hitting have yeah, they've hit Haifa and Nevatim just this week. The Israelis have, I mean, yeah, the Israelis have been hit with these missiles. The Americans, the Truman aircraft carrier, which may have left the area, um, was hit with 2 cruise or targeted with 2 cruise missiles and 2 drones. The Carl Vinson, another aircraft carrier, they had 2 there for a while. Now it might just be the Vinson. The Vinson was targeted with 3 cruise missiles and 4 drones. 22 MQ-9 drones have been taken down and counting. And I guess the Americans keep sending them because they need them for not just for bombing, but for target acquisition. They do not want any manned fighter jets or bombers to be taken down or any pilots captured. That's the last thing they want. Syed Abdul Malik Badruddin al-Houthi made a speech, his usual Thursday speech, and he mentioned specifically the Palestinian ambush, the breaking the sword ambush. So he is absolutely up to speed in terms of what's happening with the resistance in Palestine. He said the Americans are staying more than 1,000 kilometers offshore of Yemen. He talked about 7 drone and missile operations into Palestine and 9 naval clashes with the Americans, with 27 missiles and drones in the past week. I guess the winning quote for me from his speech was this one. He says, "The Palestinian people's steadfastness, lasting more than a year and a half despite genocide and total war, is unprecedented and serves as a proof upon the Ummah being the Muslim nation, the global Muslim population." And he says, "Their will has outlasted every expectation." So apparently, going to Iran quickly. The Iranian negotiations with the Americans are ongoing, but at the same time, there was a huge explosion today. You may remember that Lebanon had an explosion very similar to this in their port area, a massive, unbelievably huge explosion. I assumed then that that Lebanon blast was a Western or Israeli terrorist attack, which has the same thing, I assume, is the case now, some form of trying to pressure or derail. I don't know whether it's part of the negotiation to do terrorism or whether it's to derail the negotiations to do the terrorism, but they didn't announce it. If they wanted to derail the negotiations and start the war, they would announce and then start bombing Iran. The fact that they're doing it as a covert operation is presumably a lower threshold for they're trying to keep it they're trying to keep the pressure below the threshold of war, I suppose. Same as they do when they kill scientists and assassinate figures like that, as opposed to initiating a big bombing campaign, which they also have done, right? They did, and Iran promised the true promise 3 and haven't done it. So that's Iran. The situation in Lebanon also, the Israelis assassinated on Tuesday a professor who was associated with their resistance. They assassinated a professor by drone attack in Beirut. So that's in terms of Lebanon's ability to defend its sovereignty against the Israelis. Not really. Not really. And Syria, the de facto leader of Syria now, Jolani, is demanding that the Palestinian factions in Syria disarm. They've arrested and disappeared some leaders from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So once again, my most bitter, you know, my most bitter feelings towards the people who supported the destruction of Syria, and that continues to cause reverberate and cause damage to the Palestinian resistance, and help the Israelis and the Americans, absolutely, which was the whole point of the whole thing. So they're just doing what they were always going to do, and but so that's the sit rep this week. Uh, it's a much more dynamic situation in terms of the war. The resistance has been able to reach the Israelis and do all the things that the resistance does when they reach the Israelis, which means now negotiations are also more serious because the Israelis are now back to remembering what the ground war looks like, and they may have been able to entertain illusions about their superiority as long as the ground war was not on, as long as they were just bombing and starving people. But now that the ground war is back on, it's a different it's a different reality for them too, which they slowly um, can't help but slowly come to, I don't know, not understand or accept, but it will affect them. Reality tends to affect everybody, even those who deny it. So, um, it's a very kinetic week, a very dynamic week, and a lot of surprises, and I'm sure atrocities will happen in the coming week as well. So, until then, hang in there, and I'll see you in the next one.